Now moving on to our studios in Nasrec, where my colleague Cindy Mabe and Audrey Chimwanda will be taking us through some of the discussions and debates that are taking place over there.
Thanks so much, Lesego, and good evening to our viewers. Welcome to Nasrec Expo Center. It is the ANC 5th National Policy Conference, and a very big thank you to our colleagues earlier on, Abigail Fasahi and Mfundo Mabalane. They really held down the fort. I think ours is more glamorous because we essentially just wrapping up the day's event.
And they do all the dirty work. Of course, a huge thank you to them. Of course, like what my colleague said, Cindy, we're coming to you live from Nasrec Expo Center, where we have about 3,500 delegates from the branches of the ANC who gathered here to discuss policies, of course, in preparation of the elective conference in December. We have, as usual, a panel that will be helping us to discuss what happened throughout the day. Let me introduce to you Professor Sipho Siebe. We do not need to introduce him at this stage, because we always give a big practically family. We are from KwaZulu-Natal, the ANC provincial spokesperson, that's Mr. Mdumiseni Ntuli. And from the Free State, we also have the provincial spokesperson in studio, Mr. Thabo Meako. Gentlemen, very good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening. Good evening to you. Just to start us off, and if you've just joined us and you'd like to know what happened or transpired today, of course, it seems like the ANC has now put a different spin to the radical economic transformation topic. And this time around, it seems more like a contestation or even consultation with business, whether it is to appease established business or even branches. That remains to be seen. It's what we'll be discussing this evening. But let's listen in earlier on what ANC NEC member Nathi Mthethwa had to say about this particular topic.
Monopoly capital, our attitude should not change. Our attitude to it, and that is cooperation and contestation. It shouldn't change, and it won't change, as it were. And what is also not going to change is to understand that monopoly capital is the content we are dealing with, emanating from our understanding on the colonialism of a special type thesis. We shouldn't be aspiring to be changing white monopoly capital for black monopoly capital. The uncompetitive nature of monopoly capital makes us raise an issue of contestation, whether it would be black or white. But you don't have to deny a fact out of long history of colonization in South Africa. Of some of the institutions you mentioned here is about that, is about understanding our relationship with monopoly capital, which is cooperation and contestation. The level of which, whether it's contestation or cooperation, would be in the balance of evidence. But to the extent that you emphasize radical socio-economic transformation,
people of South Africa must own the means of production of the economy. So we can't do it when we are romanticizing this issue of radical economic transformation. We must hold the bull by its horns and say what it is. So we dare not fail our people. And as this generation, history will judge us very harshly if we were to fail the people of South Africa.
The National Development Plan has been adopted not only by government, but also by the governing party at the last conference of the ANC in Mangaung. Also, it has been adopted by the Parliament of South Africa, which means the majority of South Africa's people have embraced the National Development Plan. That is why it is our plan as the governing party which we are currently implementing.
And there you you have it, the way to go forward by the ANC with regards to radical economic transformation. Should it be a cooperative conversation, or is it going to be a very uncomfortable conversation? Those are some of the issues that we'll be discussing today. Coming to you, Professor Siposiwe, Benathi Mthethwa, having pronounced and having mooted the whole decision of how the ANC should be going forward, of the discussions that need to be had. Should it be radical? Should it be a cooperation with the people that are monopolizing the capital in South Africa?
Well, I think the first thing that they need to agree on is the definition of a problem. If you define it incorrectly, your solutions are likely to be incorrect. And given that we are in South Africa and the issue of race looms large, there is a degree of sensitivity in how people deal with these issues. So there are times when people try to beat about the bush, like when you ask them to describe a cat, then they tell you that the cat is not a dog. But that's an attempt to move away from describing what it is, or describing it as a four-legged animal. But a donkey is also a four-legged animal. But it's an attempt where you are not going to say the definition of a cat being a four-legged animal is incorrect, but it is inadequate. So what you've seen today was an attempt by Benathi Mthethwa to try to really say it is okay to talk about white monopolic capital. But the ANC's entry into the debate is that it is opposed to a monopoly of any kind. But that itself is an attempt to say to white folks that we're not against you, we're simply against a monopoly. But you are monopolizing the space. So I do think that what is important for our people on the ground and South Africans, they would like to have a situation where being black does not mean being poor, does not mean being landless, does not mean being hopeless and landless. So those are the issues. It does not mean being unemployed. So the question is that when you look at the Freedom Charter and even our Constitution, it talks about creating a non-racial, non-sexist, and prosperous society. But what South Africans want, and especially African people, is to say we should be part of that prosperity. And as we speak now, Africans are not sharing or are not part of that prosperity. So they must start first with defining that reality and then saying, can we now come up with instruments that will address that? But what we tend to do, we tend to be bogged down on definitions. Our people are not interested in definitions. They know what their realities are. Talk about their realities and tell them that we are going to address that reality.
All right, let's just talk from a regional point of view of the ANC. We'll start with the Free State, Mr. Thabo Miku, as the spokesperson there. How the branches and the region handles and manages this particular issue, which seems more like being apologetic from the ANC's point of view, as opposed to the radicalism that we've heard.
Look, what guided us as a province, even at a point when we met branches of the ANC throughout, including to invite civil society organizations, and the spirit was that there's an attempt to bring almost everybody. And the understanding is that our history, and this is the ANC literature, is that as a country we're conquered by force and we're ruled by force to achieve white supremacy. And including even today, as we go deeper to analyze the reality of our country, I mean, you look at poverty, you look at unemployment, you look at all the structural challenges of the economy in our country, they assume a racial element of it. And that's why we said our policy, the policy of the ANC, can never be consolidated, can never be concluded to be scientific if it does not take into account the reality of the lives of our people on the ground. And then our determination then came to say, yes, it's true. The economy develops and it got a tendency towards monopolizing. But in South Africa, that monopoly is exactly the people who established, the people who led, people who conquered us.
Okay, can we not use euphemisms and all sorts of other means of describing what it is. Are we saying it's white monopoly capital, at least from the Free State regional ANC? Are you saying it's white monopoly capital that needs to be dealt with, or are you saying it's a shade or it's a form of dominance that you're dealing with?
Well, in summary, it's white monopoly capital that we must deal with.
Okay. Maybe it was from a KZN perspective. Is it white monopoly capital or anything else?
Look, it's essentially, you see, the bottom line is that there's been an evolution of our language as a movement, informed by certain conditions. But the fact of the matter is that the content of the name of our revolution is a monopoly capital, but its character and form is white. That's the bottom line. And if you do not, if you divorce the content from the form, you would then miss the point in terms of the interventions you must devise in order to address that situation. That is why, as KwaZulu-Natal was saying, South Africa is part of many countries that were colonized and that were victims of imperialism. But the reason why we called our own a colonialism of a special type was a recognition of the fact that there was in one territory the oppressor and those who are oppressed. And that on its own is actually the form. But if you don't recognize the importance of the form, then you miss the point in dealing with the content.
Yeah, there's a point that I also want us not to lose. There are objective realities, but there are also what you call subjective realities. What Thabo raised is a concept of white supremacy, which manifests itself in subjective expression. But it's very important for people to understand what white supremacy is. It is actually a thought system. It's a system that makes black people even to be propagators and propagandists of the same system that undermines them. To understand it, I always like to use patriarchy. And the way patriarchy is also a thought system that says men are better than women. That even women themselves will be the ones who defend patriarchy. Where you find that women, even though they may be in the majority, when there's a need to elect a leader, they will elect a man because they are wired to think that leadership has to be. So white supremacy also is the one that must be dealt with. And if you go to the literature of the ANC, I mean, you should just go to Mandela's speech at the Rivonia trial. He keeps on talking about white supremacy, precisely because he knows that sometimes even the oppressed themselves can be co-opted into systems that sustain their own oppression. So the ANC must also be able to deal with that issue, because it's also some of the issues that creates a problem in terms of definition, where people become almost proxies for whiteness, where whenever my analysis in the past of the ANC is that it is always sometimes trapped in what about whites. If you have to define something, then you must also make sure that you accommodate whiteness. But the point is, the objective reality tells you that the poverty has a color, and that color is black.
Let's get a response from Mr. Meko. Is the ANC at this point appeasing that white monopoly capital, which we agree is the enemy of progress in this country?
Look, in our province, essentially our economy is mining and agriculture. You go deeper in the analysis of poverty, you realize that indeed they assume the racial lines, and that's why we don't want to diagnose the problem wrongly, because we know we'll arrive at wrong determinations or solutions. And that's why even moving forward we're saying deal with what is the problem facing South Africa in order to address the problems of Africans and the blacks in South Africa.
Yeah, and your response to the ANC being apologetic and always being overtly so protective and considerate.
Some in the ANC.
Some in the ANC, of being defensive, if you will, of whiteness and white interest.
Well, it's unfortunate because then it distorts the target of our revolution, and it creates an impression in society that we're apologists. You know, that is why you would find people who are saying, for instance, that what do you do? I heard one delegate in the commission says, how do you handle a situation where you get hijacked, and at the time when you are found in your car with a person who was attempting to hijack you, you are then told that you now enjoy the same rights. You must be treated equally, treated the same, primarily because both of you are human beings, even though The other one is actually acquired the right to be in your own space through means that were not illegal and acceptable. Now, that narrative, that line of thinking is informed by the fact that at times our leadership appears to be very reluctant in terms of moving with the degree of decisiveness and the degree of commitment and courage to deal with the problem in front of us. And this issue about white monopoly capital is part one of those issues where, because you see now there's a wrong notion that if you characterize it for what it is, you're anti-white, which is not true. The face of poverty, as Professor was saying, is black. And I want to add and say, the face of success and wealth in this country, in terms of the ownership of the means of production, is white. And if you don't accept that, you are not going to solve the problem that we're confronted with.
Right, let's get more perspective on this issue. We also have a wider panel from our Midrand studios that is joining us live with regards to this issue. Mr. Udo Freze, that's an independent political analyst. Thank you for joining us, sir. Your take with regards to white monopoly capital, how do you separate the two? Can you separate the color of what white monopoly capital represents in South Africa? Also, the remnants of what colonialism and, of course, apartheid, and how they structure the economy coming from there, and how it has evolved to the state that we're looking at now. Also, how the ANC is looking at it with the different views that we're getting from the different members who we thought had a unified voice going forward with trying to define it. Are we also wasting time in trying to define what white monopoly capital is, or should we just call a spade going forward?
Well, good evening. It is definitely white-owned monopoly capital. There's no doubt about that, and the ANC actually has no choice but to address it. It was former recalled President Thabo Mbeki who called this society as being a two-tier society. One is middle-class, white owners of the economy, and the majority is black and owners of nothing and poor. So we have a situation which is very, very difficult to handle. And the ANC, as big as it is, would be the only organization to be able to handle it. Similar to the land situation where willing seller, willing buyer has never ever worked, neither in Zimbabwe, nor in Namibia, nor in South Africa. So these things need to be carefully and maturely addressed. And I'm sure the ANC will be the only party at the moment in South Africa to be able to address that. What we have at the moment also this South Africa's economy can be described as an exclusive, oligopolistic, warehouse and rent-seeking economy, which makes it very, very difficult to address because everything is in one pool, and it's the old status quo of 1948, which has never been changed since up to 2017. It's very, very difficult. And I don't envy the ANC doing what they have to do, and they have no other option. But this divide and rule also makes it easier for the owners of the economy to rule and to actually control everything, literally everything, including the media, including the judiciary, all those aspects of society that need to all be urgently addressed. It's 23 years into the rule of the ANC, and those things cannot be avoided any longer.
All right, Mr. Freze, please stay with us. We're back here at the Nasrec studio, essentially talking about divide and rule and whether the ANC is united in the approach to radical economic transformation, saying that this is going to be a litmus test. It's going to be very difficult and uncomfortable for the ANC to do, but it's something that is unavoidable. So is there, in your view so far, a common vision? Are you looking through the same same lens? I won't say rose-colored glasses because it's not an enviable position that the party's in at the moment, Professor Siep.
Well, I think one of the points that Thabo was raising is sometimes to go back to the text of the ANC. If you look at what the ANC has always said, that it is a movement, a liberation movement, whose objective is the liberation of black people in general and Africans in particular. There was nothing racist about it. It was informed by an objective reality. So if you sustain yourself that way, you need to ask, have we reached a stage where black people in general are free and Africans in particular are free? And the answer is that we have made progress in terms of at the political level, but we have not made progress economically. So that language is still a language that is relevant. And the ANC, even with that definition, was able to corral every grouping And one must also have sympathy with where the debates may come, because the ANC defines itself as a multi-class, a multiracial. I mean, they may say non-racial, but non-sexist. But having these different groupings, there will also be moments where there might be contradictions in terms of class interest, in terms of race interest. But it must manage them in the same way that it is managed. But if first you go first, say, why did you exist? And it has used that language, to invite people who are also concerned about the conditions of freedom and democracy.
Yeah, but we need to expedite things now. It's been 23 years, and we can see the frustration bubbling in why things materially haven't changed for black people, besides the free RDP houses and other amenities, that the cooperation between white monopoly capital hasn't worked effectively, because we've seen the introduction of black economic empowerment, affirmative action, employment equity, and the list goes on, that if this RET doesn't work, and you still use the same methodology as you've done in the past, how effective is it going to be, Mr. Miku?
Look, it is all of us at the ANC National Conference in Mangaung. As you know, that we're preparing for the other national conference this coming December. All of us agreed that we are at the stage where we can at least claim that we've consolidated the first phase of our program, and the content is that we've been able to address the basics. We're able to provide our people with dignity. And now we need to go into the second phase of our program. And that second phase entails that there must be a decisive intervention into the economy. And of course, part of our first program, the first phase, was also to make those engagement with the economy and all of that. And the assessment is telling us that, but they were not drastic enough, and that's why we've got to up the gear. And that's why we're bringing this new spirit that, of course, we've got to deal with issues of the structure, we've got to deal with the issues of the ownership of the economy. If indeed, ultimately, the other social groups which were systematically excluded by our previous unfortunate history have got now to be integrated within the economy.
Yeah, President Zuma spoke about a January 8th statement using the state levers, legislation, and other policy reform to effect radical economic change. No sooner had we heard that, then the mining charter, the revised version thereof, was tabled, and there was resistance. Very much so, not only from the Chamber of Mine, you could call it white monopoly capital, but also from certain quarters in the ANC saying, the application is not clarified, consultation wasn't done, and criticism. Can the party afford to speak one philosophy or gospel and then act differently?
You see, there's a consensus about where we must go. We all agree that we have to effect a radical economic transformation. The issues now are around the modalities. Where do you start and how do you go about doing it? Let me give you an example of how in KZN we've begun dealing with this question. Firstly, we have taken a decision as the provincial leadership, which we have said the government must implement, and that work has already started. That in all our schools, as an example, we need to ensure that there are cooperatives and small, medium business people who are going to be responsible, for instance, for the production of their uniforms. And we have to use the government power to direct the schools to ensure that they buy from the local producers, those who are producing those uniforms. That work is starting. We are putting together the system so that it doesn't fail along the way. The second part is that in all our clinics and hospitals, because where you need to begin is where you are in charge. Where you are in charge at the moment is in government. All our clinics and all our hospitals and even our schools, by the way, have got a huge supply of food that goes there. That must be done by people who are dealing with agriculture at the lower level. Majority of them must be Africans and blacks in general. And that is part of the intervention that the state and the government in this case is going to be effecting to alter the economic ownership pattern in our country. Of course, the big business is not going to keep quiet. This is going to be a huge battle. It's going to be a fight. Capital is not going to give in. It's going to divide our leadership. It will co-opt some of them who have got shares in their own big conglomerates. They are going to speak a language that is not in line with, that is at variance with the aspirations of our people. Not because they can't see where we must go, but because some of them, if you benefit from a system It's not easy to demolish that system. But we need courageous leadership that will say, what we have, let's use it effectively to effect this change. What we do not have, let's continue to persuade capital to join in this battle. If they don't want to join, the contestation is going to be permanent. But we have to forge ahead with this agenda.
So how then do you have a conversation of cooperation like we have been hearing with a group of people that have been monopolizing the capital, like you have said, that, you know, up to now we've been having these conversations. They haven't come up to say, look, we understand the situation, we appreciate what you're saying, and we agree with you. Let's meet halfway. This is what we're willing to do for us to make this inclusive economic growth work in South Africa. We haven't heard that conversation coming from them.
I think we must also be truthful as people in this country. When you talk about the change, you are saying we are unhappy with the status quo, we want to move elsewhere. But you must also understand that the people who benefit from the status quo. So you're not going to make change and have everybody happy. That is the biggest problem that South Africans have. They think you can change. There's never been any transformation, any change where there's no pain. We did not get this freedom because some people changed their minds. We got this freedom because we fought for it. People died, there were sacrifices. So if you're going to have change, those who benefit from the status quo will resist it. And they'll also resist if they will also use those they've co-opted who are actually benefiting from the system. So we must accept that. So the notion that everybody is going to be happy is the first thing that we must get rid of. Then the second thing that one can also say is that the government has been able to say, let us not behave as if we're helpless. We have powers where we can control certain things. And it's very good that at least with the announcement by the president during SONA and also the former minister of finance pointing out that from now on, any major project, 30% of it will go to black hands. What it requires from the ANC is to make sure that when they look at the budget of every department, that is adhered to. There's a compliance. If there's no compliance, there must be consequences. So there is a movement. So the first thing that they did that is correct is at the level of defining what they mean. And it requires only a person who is welded, who benefits from the status quo in the ANC to pretend that they don't understand what that means. So for those of us who listen to their pronouncements, we'll be watching how are you changing the structure, how you are changing the processes, how is your budget, what are the state levers of in government that you have, so that we see a movement. So the impatience that we see among the young people is a correct one. We come from an accommodative approach. This is why we allowed the offensive statues to be there at our universities. It took young people to say, let's remove
But Professor Siepa, let me just bring it in, which is still very fresh in memory, with Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba taking the helm, saying essentially it's all about inclusive growth and not talking what one would have expected to be in line with where the party is going now in its second transition. Is this again a compromise that we're finding ourselves in that, or is it essentially just easing us into what the rest of the program will be rolling out? Mr. Ntu?
No, I don't think it's a compromise of any kind. You see, the radical economic transformation is in any way intended to benefit everybody in this country, with a focal priority to those who are marginalized. There is no agenda to remove white people from the economy, but the call is that the economy of this country cannot be in the hands of the minority. And the reason why there will always be sentiments about the inclusive growth of the economy, even though at some point it gets distorted and diluted away from the fundamental task of radical economic transformation. But it's to underlie the fact that this is not a call to marginalize white people. It's not about that. It's a call to ensure that those who are sidelined by the system deliberately are brought into the mainstream, and those who benefited before accept that they can't move on their own and live a better life in a country where many of our people are living under the conditions of poverty and deprivation.
And I suppose it all boils down to the leadership that the ANC chooses going forward to make sure that they can actually champion this issue of a radical socio-economic transformation. And this is a debate that has been raging on. We do know that 3 provincial branches of the ANC have actually challenged the notion of Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa then succeeding and ascending to the presidency. And the main argument is the natural succession, whether it is democratic or not. And the Free State chairperson, Ismachashulu, says that his province nominated Cyril Ramaphosa to be the deputy president, but that does not automatically make Ramaphosa next in line for the presidency. On the other hand, we have KwaZulu-Natal chairperson, Cyril who says that an ANC leader needs to be loyal to the ANC, as Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma has demonstrated. And the departure from tradition was started by the Northwest ANC chairperson, Suprema Omapelo. He argued that deciding succession and who is next in line stifles the branch's democratic right. Now let's take a listen in to what Ismachashule and Sihle Zakalala and Suprema Omapelo had to say, and the discussion that we had in studio with them with regards to this issue.
What is the constitution of the ANC saying? What have we done since the ANC was unveiled? 1991 conference in Durban. We voted. We voted for the leadership which branches wanted. We went to the next conference, we voted. We went to the next conference, we voted. We never voted because you are holding a particular position. The branches nominate. So if you say the branches nominate, we could have put it in our constitution to say this is how we are going to elect leadership. In the constitution of the ANC, it says a member has a right to elect and a member has a right to be elected. I hear people citing history. We can also cite history. And I'm just citing it from 1994. And we can go even beyond, before 1994, how the ANC. You see, when we are divided, when we have certain preferences, we should not say this is how things must actually be done. In fact, my province and many other provinces in the country, it's us who wanted Deputy President to be Deputy President, Cyril Ramaphosa. We approached Deputy President ourselves. And at that time, this is what I remind people, at that time people were saying Cyril Ramaphosa is part of the white monopoly capital. We said the ANC is a broad church. Within the ANC, you have people with money. Within the ANC, you have those who are communists. Within the ANC, you have non-communists, Jews and Gentiles, rich and poor. So the ANC is an omnibus. So when we elect leadership of the ANC, we elect leadership of the ANC from members in good standing.
The issue of Comrade Nkosazana should not only be reduced to women candidates, no, but should be about a track record. She's one of those who arrived in the organization while she was very young. In the late 70s, it was not fashionable for women at that time to join Umkhonto weSizwe, to go to exile. And she's one of those who have led from that time until now. Whether elected or she's not elected, she has always been there. When she was not elected in Polokwane, she didn't leave the organization for NGOs or business. She remained in the ANC.
In the ANC, there's no succession. There's no kinship or traditional leadership system within the African National Congress. Succession is in traditional leaders, in the kings and so on. In the ANC, we talk about election of leadership because we are a democratic organization. Now, there's no way you can say that there shouldn't be democracy in the ANC. If you practice democracy, the organization is going to break down. The organization is going to collapse. Then there's no need for the ANC to be a democratic organization.
All right, so this is where we are. Of course, there's a lot to discuss with regards to the succession debate. We've heard whether there is empirical evidence or that the ANC will stick to tradition, that the deputy president of the party will automatically succeed, ascend to power. And joining us in studios, Mr. Thabo Meku. He is the Free State spokesperson of the ANC, and Mdumiseni Ntuli is the KZN spokesperson. Professor Sipho Siepe is a political analyst. Let's delve right into it, whether tradition will supersede what the preference is, because it is ultimately about what the branches decide as to who is the next president or even the top six of the ANC. Is tradition that of the deputy president becoming president?
Look, our understanding as a province is that the fundamental principle about leadership is that the leadership is elected on the basis of a program. Precisely what we are doing here. We came here as a province to say this is our perspective. We're engaging other provinces, they're also engaging us. And immediately after that consolidation, then we'll start thinking about what is the collective of men and women who will take this thing to where we want to take it.
Okay, again, does the deputy president, just in simple terms...
That was not answered.
I know, right?
Is it tradition or not? I think that's what we're trying to establish. Perhaps KwaZulu-Natal can pronounce that for us, clarify it for us.
You see, a tradition has got to be universal. The African National Congress is a unitary organization. So you can't say a deputy at a national is an automatic successor if you can't say that at a provincial, regional, and a branch level. Then it's not a tradition. It's a practice that might have happened in some instances, and in others it was not been able to be carried out. Comrade Kgalema Motlanthe stood when the sitting president was also available to be elected. If there was a tradition, the deputy would not contest the sitting president. So it's not a tradition. People who are making it to appear like it's a tradition, and all of us are at war to try and circumvent or change that tradition, are simply advancing a particular view in the choice of leadership. It's not about the tradition. They are deputy. Comrade Walter Sisulu, by the way, was the deputy president to Comrade Nelson Mandela. He did not become a president. I know the excuse would be that he was old at the time of his election, but that term was a 3-year term of office of the National Executive Committee.
But why do you think it's being questioned so much now? It's being brought up, this issue of...
It's being brought out because people want to argue their case why a sitting deputy president must succeed the president.
So would you say a certain faction perhaps is trying to take
precisely
advantage?
And the intention of that call is that all of us must be diverted away from through the eye of the needle, which directs us on how we must select leadership based on the program of the day and the task of the moment, as Comrade Thabo Meku was saying.
Yeah, I think it's a simple matter. The reason why the ANC has a policy conference is to come up with a policy and then to say, having these policies, who is best equipped to be able to deal with that? And so that is the first thing. So you cannot start choosing somebody before you have clarity on the policy and programs. Because other people may differ with those programs. I mean, if you take, for instance, the government has come up with a charter, you already have people who have a problem with it. So if you have people who have a problem with a charter, you can't then say that person must pursue that. That person will become an impediment by definition. But the second issue is that the ANC talks about having a contest. So if something is automatic, then there is no contest. Why go through the rigmarole when you know what the outcome is? So one must actually put that logic suggests that is actually nonsense. But also that historically it is not justified. Of course, Thabo laughs at that because this is what I used to tell them when they were students, that they were giving me problems. But they knew that when they come to my class and to meeting me, they had to be very logical. So there must be logical coherence in how you come to a conclusion. So you can't say people are going to contest. Even the current president, when he was in Polokwane, there was a contestation. So if it was a tradition, there was no need for him to contest against Thabo Mbeki. He would have simply moved by way of tradition. Right. So let us put it as simply a historical nonsense. and also logically inconsistent with other processes that suggest that there must be contestation and there must be a policy conference, so that once you have a policy, you want to make sure that you have the right person and the right leadership to take those policies forward. So it can't be automatic. So those who advance, and you see people who have already trapped because they've pronounced before. So they have to stay there even when all else does not follow.
Yeah. So you're saying in a nutshell that the natural succession is undemocratic, as the ANC Northwest Chairperson Supra Mohammed Bello.
You don't have that in the ANC. There's no succession. And that's the point I was attempting to make. Yeah. That, look, if your basis is this particular program, nothing becomes automatic, nothing becomes natural. There will never be such in the African National Congress. And our history throughout has demonstrated that. Or we will assess these individuals on the basis of the approach we have adopted. That approach is through the eye of the needle, that talks about the character of the ANC and how we must go about arriving at the determination of these men and women who must take us where we want to go.
Let's get Mr. Udo's perspective. He's joining us live from our Midrand studios and joining our panel here. That's at Nasrec Expo Center. Mr. Udo, is there a clash between tradition? Of course, some ANC members here in studio are saying that it has never been a tradition of the ANC. Is it opportunistic, perhaps, for some of them that are trying to obviously align themselves with a leader that they want to see taking over the reins of the ANC going forward?
It is definitely opportunistic, but at the same time, it's obvious that the ANC is not a feudalistic party. At the same time, everything seems to be done from the private business sector, from the economists, from academia, from the media, to actually oust President Zuma before December this year, so that their feudalistic thinking can be satisfied, to bring in the deputy president of the ANC and eventually of the government. So that is the reason why they are gunning for President Zuma as well as the ANC leadership. It's very difficult to see through certain things, but at the same time, uninformation lends itself to disinform, which makes therefore the national population, the voters, insecure. They don't know which way to turn, and they do not know now whether to call him a Gupta-right or not a Gupta-right, or to call him this or that or whatever, Nkandla, you name it. There are many words to discredit President Zuma and the ANC. But this should not actually waylay the ANC at all in its preparations for the elections and the conference in December this year and the elections 2019. The ANC still remains the strongest, and there's indeed what one can see from outside, and I speak to many people from outside in the SADC, there's no competition to the ANC at all. They like to hype it up, but it doesn't exist. It's a figment of the imagination. One thing one needs to actually address also, and I would like to throw this into the public debate, is the secret sunset clauses. And those secret sunset clauses were brought in by two people. One was Apartheid de Klerk, the other one was SACP President who head Joe Slovo. And that is to protect the minority groups and their rights. And I think that is dangerous, because that is grand apartheid's division and rule. This is an apartheid kind of state. And one needs to caution against that very, very much. And it would be good to debate this and bring in the public into the debate and trust, so that everybody knows what is going on, so that we're not part of an information war, as Hillary Clinton described the current situation globally. So we need to make sure that everybody understands the ANC in its drive to what it wants to achieve as far as the economy is concerned, as far as land is concerned, as far as education is concerned, as far as the judiciary is concerned. People need to know and understand.
So our political analyst in the Midrand studio essentially warning of external influence when it comes to the successor of President Jacob Zuma, saying that industry and labor at this point were very vociferous in their support for CR17, but ultimately it is about the branches going forward who will be the next president. Is there undue influence in terms of business, in your view, or has it been? And I know I'm asking a rhetorical question, but please, for the benefit of of our viewer, can you respond to that? Just how much business and white monopoly capital has influenced the organization so far?
Look, it's not going to be easy to quantify it, but it's inevitable that who become the leader of the ANC would be the leader of our country. And everybody who is in one way or the other having an interest in the development, in the future of our country, would want to have an influence on who become the leader of South Africa. And that does not exclude monopoly capital. is very interested on where the ANC and its government is going to be going. And that monopoly capital is the one, by the way, that is doing all that which is possible to tarnish the image of President Zuma and anything that is seen to be associated with President Zuma. We are not surprised that, for instance, the name of Comrade Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma is never assessed objectively on the basis of her contribution in the struggle. It's always assessed on the basis of her previous life and relationship with the current president of the ANC. That work is not the work of some people who are doing witchcraft somewhere. That's the work of the enemies of the revolution, who want to influence the direction of the ANC and the direction that our country will ultimately take when the new government comes into office in 2019. So definitely, there is going to be an influence of capital, an influence of all other forces in the country who have their own agenda to succeed.
So you're saying it's not an imaginary enemy and that there is a concerted effort in a campaign to discredit Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. Define the enemy in this case and how you'll cite examples of her reputation being tarnished even before consideration of her fit to be president. You
see, it's very real. Just look at the narrative in our country. The dominant discourse projects Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa on one hand as the best thing that South Africa can have 2019 going forward. And it projects Comrade Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma on the other side as the proxy of the family that is called the Guptas in this country, the Gupta family, and therefore a proxy of corruption and looting. And that narrative is not a narrative that is driven by an ordinary person somewhere in rural areas. The people who are engineering that narrative, the captains of that agenda, are those who are in the main, who are in the ownership of the media of this country, who are in charge of the editorial room, who want to influence our people and implant a thinking that says this is a dangerous person, not because of what she has done or capable of doing, but because of some imaginary association with certain people, and in particular with the Gupta family. On the other hand, Comrade Ramaphosa is projected as a successful businessman who has made up his money very well. We all envy that. We don't have a problem. We celebrate that. That must be celebrated. But he is projected in that way at the expense of another leader of the ANC. And our view is that you need to compare the leadership of the ANC on the basis of their own commitment to the struggle and individual contribution to the revolution and the leadership of the African National Congress.
In fact, you've just brought an example to mind of how the narrative is portrayed depending on which publication or network you're listening to. An example of Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma with the South African of the Year Awards, and this was before my time at ANN7. And then
I remember that very well.
Yeah, and then we also had then Advocate Thuli Madonsela, former public protector, who was at the same event, who was also given a prize and an award, and everybody else, you know, you see only Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma as a recipient of Gupta money, so to speak. So, you know, obviously our viewers and South Africans need to discern what it is that they believe.
There's been a very interesting, mischievous approach on this. One, as he has mentioned, you also have the person who is presented as the automatic successor, spending a lot of his time attacking the president. And the reason why the president is being attacked is to throw as much mud on him, with the hope that by association the other person will carry the mud. And I find that to be sexist. I also find it to be cowardly. If you have a problem with Nkosazana Zuma, engage directly and say, I have a problem with her for the following reason. But to attack the president and then by association then think you have attacked her, it's for me a very cowardly behavior. And it is that approach that has enabled people not to start asking what are her contributions. Because when she was involved in the struggle, she was involved in the struggle not through because of association with any other person.
Right.
So I think we must condemn that sexist behavior. Those who want to contest and they think they're better than their contenders, let them engage the contenders. Let them not engage the contenders by association through other people. And this is what I find very problematic. And here, one is not saying that Nkosazana Zuma is the answer or Cyril, but let there be a fair contestation. And I think this is why ultimately the branches are the ones who are going to be able to make that determination. Unfortunately, if you look at the media in this country, even before elections, you'll think that the ANC will be likely to get 2%. But the people of this country have always said, we don't take orders and direction from the media because we know that it has historically been anti the ANC. If you listen to what Nelson Mandela said in 1997 when he stepped down, he talked about the orientation of the media that wants to project the ANC government as by definition corrupt and anti anything that is positive.
And we have been seeing quite a bit of this from the media, but, with regards to the ANC succession debate and how the slates have been pronounced, how we've seen it being very divisive within the ANC. Do you think, I just want to hear from the branch level, that the ANC succession process is pits, those that are favorites, so to speak, against each other? Do you think perhaps there should be more of an open contestation? Would that help?
Well, we are continuing to reaffirm, the centrality, if not the importance of the ANC membership around issues of the leadership as well as the policy, because that understanding is guided by the fact that this is membership of the ANC that is full-time in the areas where our people are, and clearly they will be able to undertake an assessment about the impact those policies as driven by that particular leadership has gone and how far it has gone to be able to do. Even in this, in the current period, we're continuing to caution even against the issues of character assassination. We're continuing to, we have noted the narrative by the Premier, as Comrade Mdu is saying, that seeks to divide the membership of the ANC along the lines of individuals whose names have been raised by the branches, by the way. Because the notion that there's a contest in the ANC, you see, maybe it's a new culture that has been introduced, but it's not something that the ANC orientate itself along, except to say that it would be the branches of the ANC that says, we have seen the conduct, we have seen the commitment, we know the understanding of this leader, we know that his or her track record is impeccable, and we think that in terms of the current program, in terms of addressing the current issues, she or he will be able to address us. It is anti-ANC, and I think it's the worst form to even speak against the issues of women not being capable to lead the African National Congress. Anybody in the ANC, especially women, are equally capable to be able to lead our people and to lead this country to where all of us would want it to go.
So if you were to look at the caliber of leadership that the party requires based on the document through the eye of the needle, is it CR17 or NDZ17? Quick answer, don't even think about it.
No, the leadership is going to be on the basis of either of the two templates. It's going to be on the basis of the character and the historical record of that leadership. We will say to each one of them, where have you been over the past 20 years, for instance? What was your involvement in the struggle? What contribution have you made during the liberation and post-liberation? What is it that we are known of? Can you be firm and confront one monopoly capital? Or you are going to be trembling when they call you somewhere in Europe in the evening and tell you that you can't go this way? Or you would be part of us and say, I would want to die where my people are going to be. That's the kind of leadership we are going to be looking at. It's going to be neither this or that. It's going to be who comes closer to the agenda that we want and is unapologetic about that agenda.
And I'm sure the 50-50 parity will weigh very strongly on that, or at least in women representation, because we can argue that both leaders have got the struggle credentials, been detained, been displaced, and all sorts of things that ultimately maybe just might rest on the gender.
Right.
So am I to say.
That would be very interesting, of course.
Gender can also be male. when you talk about
nowadays it's not.
50-50 is our decision now. When we took it some time ago, so there's no doubt about it. It will be implemented.
But I also think we need to disabuse ourselves with the notion that if this leader is elected, the ANC loses power in 2019. The ANC can only lose power if after this conference we're going to have another breakaway or a split, which would be almost equal to those who are remaining. Other than that, it's really immaterial who becomes the leader of the ANC. Yeah. If the ANC emerges out of that conference united and agreeing that this is the leadership we've chosen, we will stand behind that leadership. And start having people who are going to go out and say, I'm a veteran, I'm this and that, I've done this, but I have a problem with this leadership. That's not leadership. Leadership must always conduct itself in a manner that is exemplary, both to those who are inside in the ANC and also making those who are outside getting attracted to come and be part of the ANC.
Actually, that's also part of the narrative that the ANC must confront. Because what I find interesting is that leaders of the ANC are the ones who keep on raising this specter of the ANC losing. Other parties are much more realistic about planning ahead to 2024. But you'll find people who are embedded in a particular factional view who will then say, if you don't appoint this person, the ANC is going to lose. And you've heard some people who are outside the ANC alliance, who are members of the ANC alliance, and who are also within the ANC, propagating that as if there's only one choice. But as you rightfully indicate, the ANC, you need for it to continue to be a voice of the people, it needs to show that it ends that by being united. If you're not united, you're not going to get anywhere.
All right, Professor Sepe, we're going to have to take a quick ad break, and just stay with us. If you've just joined us, this is Africa News Network First Fast Live. My name is Cindy Mabi, coming to you from the Nasrec Expo Center. And I'm